Welcome.
Just see the
Sunday
sound.
morning.
And they just kept going. And they finally got to the end of the line out of town.
Sketchy.
The bus driver got off.
There we go.
Everybody was off. He's like,
okay, thank you.
what do I do now?
Well, hey, good morning. We're looking at this thing of faith in the Old Testament, this idea.
I'll have to ask you,
Just
how'd you
wanting
get
to
back in
develop the
town?
idea of faith
It was
generally.
funny,
and
though. He's quite the goof anyway, but he's quite the world traveler
so-
now. IBM puts him all over the place.
a number of points we're going to be
They'll
pulling
pick
out
you up.
over that. We don't have any
Or
time
you go to
frame on
someplace
this.
like
We
India
might
where he
go
goes
for
most frequently.
a few months.
They don't
with
want
it.
you driving there.
But looking at Old Testament
yeah.
stories primarily to
Good luck.
extract some stuff and make some differentiation between
Really?
different ways to see faith and what the outcomes of faith are. So here we go. Sorry, we're a few minutes late at getting started, but here we go. So, well, good morning, everybody. Morning. How are you? Hopefully well. David, wherever you are, you're picking up, you're sending live. They're hearing your conversation, so hopefully you're not discussing your bank details and or whatever else. There we go. Yeah, sorry, we went live. Yeah, good morning, everybody.
Bank account's BR549.
I'm sorry?
BR549.
Yeah, bank account, Social Security number. 745-277-773-666. My Social Security number.
We're on to you.
Yes. Oh. Well, hey, good Mother's Day morning. Good Mother's Day morning to you too. Thank you. Yes. Good Mother's Day morning,
Good
David.
Wednesday morning. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, I've got a microphone for you somewhere. It's down here. Hold on. That way you can be heard. There you are. So, yeah, good. I've heard it. From what I understand, you know what the busiest day of the year is for restaurants? I'll give you. It's today's day.
It's today.
Much today.
Mother's Day.
Mother's Day. Yes, Mother's Day. You know why that is?
Mothers like food.
Mothers like food, yeah. And a lot of times the dads are a bit forgetful or lazy or whatever, and suddenly, oh yeah. Well, I was planning, you can say, and then you go out somewhere to eat, but then you find yourself in a long
That's right.
line.
Forgot to make a reservation.
Yeah.
There you are. We went out Friday.
If mom's not cooking, we're eating out. Yeah. I mean, frankly, it's part of the problem. A lot of men are spoiled with a wife who can cook very, very well. Hands up, that's my problem. I make great Cheerios. I can make a bowl of Cheerios.
Excellent.
I can make an omelet. I can make I don't know what that was. I can make a few things.
My wife cooks so well that we
Spaghetti? Ask the kids on that one. What's that?
My wife cooks so well. We go to a restaurant and we kind of go,
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
But still, it's a break for her.
Yeah. That's the way Arthur would be. She would always be, we'd eat somewhere and she'd be saying, all right, I could make this and I could make it for $1. And we just paid how much, so. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, good morning. We don't have a Mother's Day message. Dan will take care of that. We're looking at faith. Actually, I've got this thing titled Faith in the Old Testament, but it's faith generally speaking, and just sort of slivering off numerous ideas of faith over the next coming weeks. We don't have any time frame on this, but we're going to do what we did before, and that is read Old Testament stories. Because in those stories, you get story. So there are some good New Testament stories that carry much of the same idea. Now, I'm going to run with a general idea that I did last week, so if you got your eyes on the slides, how do you spell faith? I'm going to put this up here really quickly, and then we'll have a word of prayer, and we'll launch. But I spell faith with 4 R's. Anyone remember what they are? The first one is? Revelation. Very good. You can read. Okay, second one. Anyone want to guess? Remember? Reality. So the third one is the response, and the fourth one is the results. And so it's this revelation where God reveals things to us. And as I said, we're going to take our time and pick this all apart. We just had a quick beginning last week with the story of Abraham and Sarah. So God reveals things, the word. Then there's the reality, that is the reasons why it is utterly impossible for God to do what he said he would do. And it's at that point where we are often faced with a crisis of do we trust the Lord or do we back away? Right? So, faith is saying that God is able to do what he said. The results of this, well, there are both physical and spiritual outcomes. The New Testament tends to emphasize more of that spiritual outcome. So that's where Paul picks up on the idea of justification by faith. However, the New Testament does talk about some of the physical outcomes. I'm not trying to put these against each other. I'm just describing what we see in the text. So, for example, David, last week, Sarah and Abraham, if we were to walk through this, what was the revelation that Sarah and Abraham were given in Genesis 18? Anybody remember? Gonna have a baby, and in 1 year. So they had already been told Abraham was told he's gonna be famous, nation would come from him and everything like this. And for 24 years, he had been wandering around with that revelation getting more precise. So it went from you're going to have many nations to you're going to have a son. And then when he tried with Ishmael, the Lord made it more precise and said, no, that son will come through Sarah and you. But still, just no time frame. So finally, in Genesis 18, the word there is in 1 year. So that means then they looked at reality. That's what Paul talks about. Both their bodies were as good as dead. Sarah was through her menopause. Abraham was older, but may have had some impotence issues or something like this. May have. Nonetheless, it was impossible. And so what would they do? Well, babies are not made by prayer. Abraham had to lie with Sarah. And so that's actually what Paul is implying there, is that when they slept together as an old couple, 89 and 99 years of age, respectively, Sarah and Abraham, they believed God would give them the baby. Right? In a year's time, Genesis chapter 21 or 22, we see that the baby. Paul picks up on the spiritual element. He says the outcome was God saw them as righteous because they believed that he had the power to do what he said he would do, right? And Paul puts that against trying to be a good person for God to accept you. He said God accepts people who believe him, not who do good things. So Hebrews picks up on the fact that they got a baby. So when you read the Hebrews account, it's, by faith, Sarah became pregnant and gave birth to Isaac and blah, 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 blah. So they're focusing on the baby, the outcome. So both of those are true. It's not that one's true, one's not. So what I don't want to create is sort of an argument of one versus the other. The Bible doesn't do that. But both of those are true. So we can say that there are spiritual outcomes from our faith and that there are practical outcomes. Let me just throw this in here too at this particular point. As we look at the Old Testament stories, you're going to be probably confronted more with just the issue of living by faith. Right? The life of faith. So we might say as a New Testament Christian, my life of faith begins when I first believe. I received the Lord. I'm justified. I'm made clean. I'm a child of God. Blah, 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 blah. Okay? Mm-hmm. But then I live by faith. And what does that mean? Well, that's a little more what we're poking around at with the Old Testament. We don't just get accepted and justified because we believe, and then we go back to trying to get good works to please God. No, we now begin to live this life of faith, which means God's got purposes and plans, and he reveals those things, and we trust him. And as we continue to live that way, that's not how we get saved, but it's how God smiles down on our life and says, way to go. It's not whether you're this perfect person, but you're actually trusting him to accomplish what he said he would accomplish. So I know this is, I'm just throwing this out here, second week. I want to actually look at the story today from the book of 2 Kings.
So come back to that slide for a minute.
Sure, okay.
Can you? You can, look at that. So I really see these four. So I was sick last week after my grandson was sick.
No,
this is all news to me. So yeah. So I really see these four playing out in the story of Abraham and Sarah.
Oh, I was going to ask that. Okay, how do you see it playing out? What's the revelation?
Okay, so clearly the revelation says you're going to have a child.
When?
In a year.
In a year.
Well, first it was you're going to have one.
Right.
And then now an example, I guess you're talking about last week, in a year you'll have one.
Right, which means they've got to do something to have a baby.
The reality is they're just laughing. Like
right.
That's an appropriate response.
And why? And as you said, the reality was
like 70 years, 80 years. Like, oh, give me a break. Well, and then the response, like you said, there was something that had to happen. Not just, okay, we'll just sit here and wait.
Right.
We're going to have to go, under the blanket. Yeah. and make a baby. So, and then of course we see the result in this case. So so I'm trying to say, okay, now in my time, God isn't telling me I'm going to have a baby in a year, but he has to tell me an awful lot of things to do. Like you say, to walk in faith. And so now I've got these things. My response will be, goodness, those are hard.
Yeah.
And now I need, because they had to have a response. Like you're right, if they'd just sat there, they wouldn't have exercised faith, let's say.
Right.
Because faith has a lot of aspects. Like this is a story of faith.
Mm-hmm.
But there's having faith and believing faith, you know what I mean? So, but I still think we need to see that, what's my response here? So yeah, I like your 4 R's. I don't spell faith with 4 R's, but maybe I'll start. So
There you go. Maybe you'll start. Maybe by the end of this you will. So when you have to do an exam at GSOT and you have to use the word
that was one of our questions.
faith,
Last night.
Abraham believed, so Abraham R. Yes,
Yeah.
Bill.
A couple of things before you read this. We are in the 21st century America. We're a results-oriented society.
Right.
Results are really not our, results are God's thing. That's his purview, the results.
Right.
That's what we worry about.
Right.
The other thing, the revelation starts with God and the results come with God. Faith begins and ends with him.
Right.
Two things in the middle, but we have something to do with that. But we don't have anything to do with it.
Yeah, so go ahead, David. Were you
Yeah,
gonna-
really good observation. Let me repeat it for the people online. So he made the point that really, in our century, results are a big deal. But in this case, we know in the Christian faith, really, the results are kind of up to God. I mean, of course, we got to do those middle 2 steps for him to be able to go and give us results. The other thing is this whole thing starts with God. God gave him the revelation and brings to the results. So really putting some beautiful color into what faith really is.
And I think that these, by the way, I came up with these 4 R's, I don't know how many years ago from just teaching Old Testament stories. And my goodness, the pattern just repeats. I mean, if I start listing stories, God asks people to do things and wow, they're faced with utter discouraging impossibilities.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a crisis there. They either believe that God's going to do it or they back away. Now, let me just throw a few things in here too. Chris, yeah, we're going to.
It's very difficult sometimes because you can say, well, God doesn't need our help. And he says you're going to have faith within a year. But at the same time, so they say, we're just going to pray about it, but we need to do something. And they think, well, maybe that means somehow through us, we realize we have these physical incapabilities maybe. So maybe he means since we have this servant, that's how it's going to happen. So they're kind of trying to figure it out. And even now, though, if you think God wants you to do something, you think, how's that going to happen? And you see certain things happen in your life. Okay, is this a sign? Is this the opportunity that I'm supposed to be looking for? And so that's where discernment has to come in and going back to praying and reading the Bible and trying to figure out, is this something, is this God opening the door now? I have to walk through it. Or is he saying, do this so that you can do this? So it's kind of a balancing act, maybe.
Yeah, that reality and response. At what point are we? I don't want to put words in your mouth, but maybe that sense of at what point do we need to back away and just say, hey, the timing's not here. I know the Lord may be leading me here, but the timing's not there. Let me back away. I'm just the door's not opening. I'm not going to break the window and make myself break into the house. Or do we just need to have a little more courage, a little more trust that God's going to work this out and keep pressing through? Huge question. And I think, to me, the answer to that is the question itself. The answer is in the question. The fact that there's not an answer to give everybody. It's just, if we're raising that question, then God is able to lead us at that moment. There are a few things that are really critical here, too. I want to emphasize that most of the time when we see these Old Testament stories, we're talking about the life of faith, how to live by faith. And Paul says we live by faith, not by sight. So we have to remember that when we first believe the gospel, it's a completely and utterly passive thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry, thing's not a good word.
No, it is.
What do I mean? Well, the revelation is you're a sinner. Christ died for your sins. You're going to die. Christ rose to life, so you will never die. Do you believe this? I believe. It's completely and utterly passive. So the reality might be things like, how could God ever love someone like me? We have those kind of doubts that creep in, or maybe this isn't the whole, maybe I'm missing something here. But in face-to-face with reality, our response is still we believe, and the result is we are saved, we are justified. So In my perspective of faith, I kind of separate these out. All of it is very simple, can follow the same model, but now that I'm justified, I'm wanting to live by faith. So let me just throw a few things in here too. What's tricky, and I've got a story, it's a very short one. The widow's oil, 2 Kings chapter 4, I think it's 8 verses. We can buzz through it and find this model. I'm asking you a question, David, and you guys jump in if you know, but I'm looking specifically for an answer here that plagued me for years. What makes it very difficult for me as I'm reading Genesis 18 and God tells Abraham in a year's time you're going to have a baby? Why? Okay, I can see Abraham, I can see it with him, but what makes it difficult for me to extract out this exact thing from that story? What makes it very difficult for me?
So let me
What
take
does
a guess.
Abraham have in the story that I usually don't have? Maybe a little more precise.
A direct word from God.
Thank you. So many times I'm working on this general sense of go into all the world and preach the gospel, but I may not have heard a voice from God saying, you are to be a missionary and you're to go to this country and you're to be there for 10 years. And so it's sometimes you follow that there? Abraham has an exact word from God. You're going to have a baby. Okay, great. Sarah, here we go.
So the first part can be hard for us. All right, the first revelation.
Right.
I think the last one can be hard for us. Like in this case, we saw the results. Sure enough, there's
Yeah.
a baby. There's a
Yeah.
result. I want to encourage you with this. When we do respond to whatever obedient act that God's asked us to do, whether it's just abiding by his word, there's this thing called the judgment seat of Christ, where everything you've done in the flesh will be paid back, whether good or bad. And so even if you don't see like the result, you were obedient, you'll get paid. So that was encouraging for me. I learned this last semester.
Yeah, that's wonderful.
But
Personally,
results may not be, sure enough,
Yep.
nope, they did.
So on a personal level, I may not see all the good outcome of the sowing of my faith and exercising of my faith. There may be things that I pass on this earth and boy, I don't ever know. And then the judgment seat of Christ, the Lord says, I'm so proud of you. You didn't give out. You trusted me, and look what I did. Now, there's another aspect
That's a big deal.
it's very big.
To stand before him and say, well done, get a well done.
Yeah.
Now that, for me, very motivating. This last semester I learned this. So
Good job, David. Good job. Way to go, David.
I even like it from Rich.
I don't know how he's going to say it. Well done, thou good and faithful servant. So we learn these Bible verses, and they become so meaningless after a while. I'm sorry, but we just
here's a take, and
the
I'll
meat-
get off this subject.
Yeah.
So he says, if you deny me, I'll deny you. So some people translate that like if you refuse to hang in there when it gets hard. But when he says, if you don't deny me, I won't deny you, I think he'll say, Father, here's one. Look what he did. I mean, I think he's going to, let's say, brag on you to the Father.
Yeah, in other words, let me push him with some precision there. Not only is David my child, accepted forever because of faith in me, but in this issue that he was facing at that moment right there, whatever that thing was, he continued to trust me. And the Father says,
Well, the reality is, what does that all boil down to?
what?
The strength of your faith.
Right.
I mean, like I tell Frank, I said, honey, don't worry about it.
Does she tell you that too?
Fusses and goes on and on.
Oh my goodness, yeah.
And it's like, honey, guess who's in charge?
Trust the Lord.
It ain't you, honey, and it ain't me, but it's God.
Yeah.
God will take care of it.
Yeah.
Do I, or do I not always?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I mean, this sounds just like our house. I mean, I think I've got big trust in the Lord. Frank, I think I do. I'll talk to you as a man. But Arthur will often say, I'm talking about something and unwinding all the details and the problems, and I believe God's going to work it out. But she just says, oh, trust the Lord. So my response, Frank, you can echo this. I'm not saying I don't trust the Lord. I just don't trust the Lord. That's my response for pretty much everything. Did you fold your laundry? I'm not saying I didn't fold my laundry. I just didn't fold my laundry. It's kind of I like that answer. I'm not saying I don't trust the Lord. I just don't trust the Lord here. So yeah, she's.
That's how I'm going to smack you.
Okay, so Hebrews also picks up on another aspect of this faith. Now, I know we haven't gotten into the widow's oil, but we can push through that story really fast, right? So just sticking with Abraham's faith, Hebrews picks up on this part of faith. Not only for you personally, David, will you not, and for all of you, as a Christian, you don't see all the outcomes. And sometimes by understanding what God wants you to do, and the reality is tough, and you respond by faith, sometimes things get really bad and go wrong. So you think of Joseph, right? Joseph did what was right in Potiphar's house, and you think God would reward him with a girlfriend and a promotion. Instead, he got slander, libelous comments made about him, and put in prison, and probably only spared because Potiphar was the execution guard and realized, well, okay, something's funny happening here. I don't know if I believe my wife or believe him, but I'll put him in prison and we'll just, there he goes. Not the good outcome you'd expect from believing. And so Hebrews picks up on some of that. But the other thing Hebrews picks up on in the end is it says Abraham, Samson, Samuel, all these great characters of faith, all of them died because our faith also is part of this big story of faith. And we're going to die until finally there's a big day when faith is finally realized, and everybody together with Abraham, the father of faith, until the last person who believes before the Lord comes, all stands up and says, finally, no more living by faith. Now we can live by sight. We are in the presence of the Lord. So if that makes sense, there's a long-term picture, not just your own personal life, but this long-term picture. When I'm living by faith, I'm kind of jumping in there with Abraham and David and Paul and Pastor Dan and everybody else until the time finally comes. Now, let me just throw one other thing in here too. I think what this thing raises is just the issue of what faith really is. If faith really is, down to this last one, this response, believing that God can do what he said he would do, it means faith is all about a person. It's not a theoretical idea. So I've heard people say things like, faith is like trusting this chair. I trust that this chair is going to support and hold me. Yeah, but this chair is it's a piece of several pieces of wood. It's inanimate. It's not a thing. To me, it's a little bit more like when you get on a flight and you're going to fly somewhere. Now, you may not think about it, but who are you trusting?
Lots of people.
The pilot and
The mechanic,
air traffic control
The people who made
and
the fuel. I mean, just
yeah, the fuel guy didn't put water in the tank and sugar or something like this. So you don't usually think about it. You just get on like a plane and complain because they didn't clean the plane properly. Why they stick me back by the toilets? Back in the day, they used to have the smoking section in the back, and there's this big cloud. And we always traveled cheap, and you're sitting there inhaling all this smoke for 7 hours on a flight. So, but think about it. You're getting on that plane, exercising complete trust. I'm gonna single out the pilot of all people, because you can get the fuel right, air traffic control can get it right, but man, you're putting your faith that guy knows how to fly the plane and land, take off and land especially. Oy. So, Chris, our resident pilot over here. So, I would say this is what we start to learn with faith. It's not just these mechanics of God made this promise. I'm going to trust that sort of inanimate promise. It's him. I'm trusting him. And so we start to realize that, like the pilot who really wants to fly and do a good job, the Father's heart is perfect and pure and kind and good. He's never a deceiver. He never leads us 3 steps on a 5-step journey and then stops and gets a good laugh at us. You were trusting me. Oh, fool. The Lord never does that. No, if he's leading us 5 steps, 5 steps are going to happen. It's just, sometimes we're kind of perplexed in all the middle of that. So I think this thing of faith really points out the fact that it's him we're trusting. And we start to learn that more. So maybe compare it to marriage. Maybe that's a bad comparison if you've had a bad marriage. But we trust people. And so that's, I think, one of the other things I think that's really critical here. Hey, let's jump over to the story for a moment. The widow's oil.
Thanks for letting us go on that one for a little while.
Oh no, it's very good.
Wonderful topic.
We're kind of discussing the mechanics, of those 4 R's and believing. So let's see if we can find these 4 R's in the story. I'm gonna give you a little clue that in this story, a couple of them are out of order, but we're going to find them, okay? So here we go. I'm reading. I've got the Bible verses on the screen this morning in case you've got your paper Bible. That's great. Read along.
Where are we here? Oh,
2 Kings, 2 Kings 4. Yeah, verses 1 through 8 through 7. The wife of a man from the company of the prophets cried out to Elisha. Pause. We're never going to get this wife's name. We're never going to understand who this prophet was. But she comes, she's a wife of a prophet. Yeah. Your servant, my husband, is dead. So her husband died. He was a sort of an underling of Elijah, maybe a servant under maybe a sub-prophet in the school of prophets, or maybe he wasn't, but maybe he was just a servant and a helper. Your servant, my husband, is dead, and you know that he revered the Lord, but now his creditor is coming to take away my 2 boys as his slaves.
Wow.
All right. So in this story, what is the revelation? Well, we're going to see that in a minute. This is where everything's a little bit out of order on my model, sorry, but it's a simple, easy story. But here we start more with the reality. What's the problem here?
It's terrible.
It's pretty simple,
It's
explained, but
terrible.
yeah.
I mean, they're broke, and she's about to have her boys not even sold to slavery, just taken into slavery to pay her debts.
And what does that mean for her?
Oh, destitution for her too.
Yeah.
I mean, she's in this society, the men really would provide. The women had plenty to do, of course, but
She's looking to those boys to
Yes,
help
she
take
is.
care of her, to provide, and as
And
she's getting older, maybe she's becoming more susceptible to corruption and problems within the society. So she doesn't have the boys there to kind of stand and help. So there's the physical protection, there's the finance and money, and maybe back in the day, before you had retirement programs and plans, your kids were your pension. You grow old, like this one African missionary friend of mine, he said when he grows old, he's going to move into his kid's house and just walk around and turn on all the lights all day long and run the hot water.
leave the door open.
Yeah, leave the door open, and he's just joking around, he's just joking. Loves his kids. But
I'm gonna
that
take all
was,
the batteries out of the remote. That's what I plan on doing in retirement.
okay, take the batteries out of the remote. There you go. So here's the problem. This is a really serious problem for this woman. I think what's interesting too is that it shows that the prophet must have had a credit card. The husband must have had a credit card. Yeah, so there's an issue here, right? He's overextended his credit. His ability to pay, yes. And maybe the wife, seems like she knew nothing of it. And maybe he was keeping all this at bay, and then finally he passed away. So he was not a wise man with finance. I find that's helpful because some of us are very wise with finance, but just because you're not good with finance and you make some bad decisions doesn't mean you're a horrible person. That's not even brought up. It's not said here that because she had a debt problem and the husband had a debt problem, they were bad people. It's not that. It's kind of part of life. Sometimes you get yourself into a pinch. You're trying to remortgage your house to save some money, and lo and behold, you lose the job, and how are you going to pay the rent now? So I like it. It's just a common problem. Nobody's condemned for having this problem. This woman is not judged or assessed in a bad light. Neither are the kids or anything. But a real problem, right? All right. What is good? What is good with what the woman has done? So far, what's good? Sorry? She went to Elisha, right? And so these prophets were like the voice of God. This is the equivalent of going to the Lord. No matter what her problem was, she went to the Lord. And to me, this is a really critical piece because usually when we get ourselves into a pickle, if it's something a little bit embarrassing, we get a little bit afraid of going to God, right? Well, I got myself into this mess, we'll say, and it's kind of an embarrassing mess, so why go to God now? I'm going to work myself out of it.
As if he doesn't already know.
As if he doesn't know, yeah. Shazam, it's a surprise to him, Whoa, I didn't notice that. How'd you get yourself into that problem? Woo, I should have been paying more attention, right? So, but it's our tendency. We not all of us, but sometimes we get ourselves in a problem and we don't want to go to the Lord. We feel embarrassed about her, but she's done what's well. This is her equivalent of coming to God. because she's looking to say, God, speak to me. This is the prophet. She's recognizing that Elisha is the true prophet in Israel. So Elisha replies, all right, here we're going to start to spell out some more of the issue. How can I help you? Tell me, what do you have in your house? Your servant has nothing here at all, she said, except a small jar of oil. Don't know how small the jar is. We don't know what kind of oil is. You know, you can guess it's maybe some cooking oil, olive oil or something, small jar. She doesn't have much left. She's probably looking at this as this is all that remains. Elisha is just going to take what she's got and watch God work. Powerful principle. We tend to look at our life and think, I ain't got much. I ain't got nothing to bring to God. And God says, well, what have you got? Well, I don't know. It's just me and my dog, my dad. Okay, well, come on. Let's come as you are. Take what you got. Let's see what the Lord can do with who you are and what you've got. So Elisha said, go around and ask all your neighbors for empty jars. Don't ask for just a few. Then go inside and shut the door behind you and your sons. Pour oil into all the jars, and as each is filled, put it to the side. Simple instructions, right? First of all, what? Go to your neighbors. Can we borrow a jar? Can we borrow a jar? Can we borrow a pot? You can have a big pot. Sure, collect all these pots. Hey, kids, go out and ask all the neighbors. Pester them all. Bother them all. Other people are getting involved in this problem. So they've got all these empty jars, right? And then they close the doors, and then the sons bring the jar, and the woman's pouring. You know, let's imagine the jar is like that she's got is that large, and we've got a huge pot up here that's, let's say it's, as big as this. And so she starts pouring. This is the idea, right? This is what he's telling her to do. It hasn't happened yet. So she left him and shut the door behind her and her sons. They brought the jars to her, and she kept pouring. When all the jars were full, she said to her son, bring me another one. But he replied, there is not a jar left. Then the oil stopped flowing. Interesting. What would have happened if they had only gone to 4 neighbors because they felt shy? Oh, I don't want to bother you today. I hate going door to door. And that's bothering me. Can I just have a jar, just one small jar? That's probably enough. I don't know. Okay, one more. I tell you boys go to one, you go to one, I'll go to one. We'll just get 3 jars. That's enough. If that's as much as they did, then that's as much oil as they would have. Now remember, this is not how you get righteous with God. This is not how God accepts you and you become a righteous person. That's simple believing. We saw that with the story last week. Abraham believed God and was declared by God to be perfect, righteous, accepted. But in the exercise of our faith, this seems like one of those times when God's putting it to this woman to say, the measure you use, it will be measured to you, as Jesus said. So there are times when you can come to the Lord and have great faith, and God is just knocking you down and taking everything out of your hands. And that's just the test. I'm going to take everything from you and just kind of watch a little bit and see if you can make it through this. Just survival right now is your test of faith. So not that every time this is always what happens, but this is one of those cases where I believe sometimes the Lord does that with us. He sort of throws something open to us and says, the measure you use, I'm going to measure it out to you. So if you come with a teaspoon, God says, that's your measure? And I say, yeah. And the Lord pours a teaspoonful in. If I come with a 5-gallon bucket, God says, that's your measure? I say, yeah. He pours 5 gallons in. If I come with a articulated lorry, as we say in England, as an 18-wheel truck with a huge sort of dumpster bin, God says, that's your measure? Okay, I'm going to fill it. There are times when God just says, be it unto you according to your faith. Not all the time. Sometimes it doesn't matter how much faith you got, God's just going to let you go through the ringer. Mm-hmm. He's going to take everything from you and just see if you hang on. Mm-hmm. This is not one of those stories. So this is kind of one of those beautiful moments here. If they had only taken a little bit of jars, they would have had. So think about that in your own life when God's kind of opening the door and saying, run with it. Run with it. I'm going to give you a season of running and going. And you sort of walk out the front door, taking your time, dragging your feet, and look back at the Lord. Should I go? And he's saying, I ain't saying no more. I said, go. I said, run. So this is one of those run moments. I'm going to try to push through this and then just be quiet and get you guys comments. We've still got time. Okay, so she left the door, right? She left him. She shuts the door. They do all this. They finally run out of jars. Now, the oil stopped flowing. That's the end of the story? There's one more verse. One more verse, right? So fair enough. This is really nice. Now we've got a house full of oil. Okay. Great. It's like having a house full of potatoes or something. Okay, great. Now we got a house full of potatoes. I mean, what do you do with all this oil, right? She went and told the man of God, and he said, she went and told him what? We got a house full of oil now. Okay. He said, go sell the oil and pay your debts, and you and your sons can live on what is left. So just a few of my own closing comments here, and then we'll see what you guys got to add into this. She's still got a piece of this thing to do. The oil isn't like the end of the story. The huge miracle, by the way. Now comes out of this huge miracle comes just the simplicity of go sell it. Now you got something to go down to the market with. Sell the oil. So they become oil salespeople with the oil shop, and they sell, and that's going to give them the money they need to pay off the debts and to live on. So just think about how sometimes God uses practical things. We're wanting him to supply miraculously our finances, and he gives us a job. Well, that wasn't very miraculous. I mean, I got to go to work now. I mean, so what do you mean it's not very miraculous? So how much faith is in our own job that we see God providing through that job? So there's a lot that this speaks to, I think. And you consider the Lord's kindness and mercy. I don't want to forget him in this picture. To look at this widow and her sons and care about their needs and care that they pay off these debts and that the sons don't go into this debtor's prison and that she's not, what was a word I'm looking for here? Destitute, taken advantage of is a specific word. Exploited, thank you. She's not exploited by societal pressures as an older widow. She's now sort of protected. God cared about all that with the passing of her husband. She didn't have a retirement plan, but God still sorted it out. So anyway, I'm just going to be quiet. David, anybody, you guys want to throw in any comments here on what you're seeing about faith? Yes, Leslie.
I was thinking, I've been reading some stories about this kind of stuff still happens today. Maybe not in the United States as often, but human trafficking, where like somebody has a debt or the mafia is involved or very bad guys, whatever, and they'll say, I need your daughter or whatever. And this happens all the time. So can there still be miracles like this? Like a person of God comes and says, I will help you find a way to provide for yourself and buy your kids back. Or does it happen in the form of like Voice of the Martyrs, like providing finances or a new motorcycle when it's been taken or whatever, things like that. Anyway, I'd love for more miracles like this to happen.
It's a good application of this. Most of us don't deal with the underworld. I don't think anybody in this room, I'm going to make a guess. Have a look at your faces. I don't think anybody in this room owes $50,000 because you were trafficked across countries to get here. Am I wrong? Nobody in that case. Okay, so we're not used to dealing with that world. That world exists all over the world every day, and it controls the streets, even of Houston, sorry to say. This is the kind of the war against our legal system and government and courts against illegal mobs and whatnot. It goes on. So yeah, how much, very specific application, how much in those kind of things when we're considering reaching out and helping and we come across people that are susceptible to trafficking and the financial obligations and debts that they owe and the bad people that they're owing back to who aren't just going to forgive or be happy that you're there to help them. And how God provides and how can he provide. And so, the simplicity of God's response.
What other comments? Well, I'll make one.
Okay.
So when I combine the reality with the response for her, so the reality is, of course, she knows how broke she is, but he said, okay, well, how much oil do you have? And the reality is, okay, well, we're going to just go gather all the jars. And it's like, so that's the reality. It's like, this is not going to happen. What are a bunch of empty jars going to do? And I can't take them. I'm only borrowing them. I'm going to have to give them back. So I can't sell these jars I borrowed from my neighbors. It's the impossibility of what he asked her to do. And then she responded. And then you threw in there, okay, are you going to bring a teaspoon? You're going to get one jar? You're going to back the truck up? See, for me, where it gets hard is you just asked me, Elijah, and you know my husband, first of all, my faith has been dinged because he was faithful to you, and here I am broke, and my kids are about to be taken. Where are you? And I do think sometimes, and I am grateful that at the judgment seat, he was like, man, you hung in there. Well done. I mean, it's encouraging.
Yeah.
You know, when it doesn't play out like you want it to.
Yeah.
And there's still eternal value in that. But so for her now, she had to respond over the top to an impossible task.
And doing some silly things.
Yeah.
If that's what you're kind of saying, go collect jars. Okay.
And so
Can't
she
the prophet
really-
just like pull in his back pocket? He's a prophet, right? And magically pull out like, how much did you need?
Yeah.
100,000? Here's
It's
3.
just so to encourage me to say, okay, when you're faced with your most worst situation and God's asking you to do something, can you even exercise more faith and say, okay, you're going to really get me through this? I mean, in ways that they'll write it and we'll be reading it 3,000 years later. You know, I mean, can I show that kind of faith? And I never realized before in this story that Elisha wasn't there. Like I kept imagining him being there and he's praying the whole time she's pouring. You know, and okay, another jar, keep praying. It sounds like she had to go tell him, like he's not even in the room. And so he told her to do that and he left. And she's like, well, really? But she did it. She exercised faith. And she saw him come through in the results. Now we're reading it today. It's just a beautiful story. Thank you for that.
Anything else is, yeah, Bill.
Back to the analogy of the faith and the pilot and stuff, we emphasize the positive side of all this.
Mm-hmm.
There's sort of a negative side. Everything outside of that airplane will kill you. The temperature, the speed.
No oxygen.
Yeah.
We exercise our faith. That's good. We should. Because around that faith, everything is trying to kill you.
That's a great, you want to repeat that for
He was saying,
those listening at home, yeah.
thinking again on the pilot, you know, we trust him, but he made the point, like, really everything outside that plane is trying to kill you. From the depth you could fall to the temperature, there's no air, at least not enough for you to breathe and live.
Wind speed.
So
and,
all
yeah.
these things are out there trying to kill you, and here you are exercising faith. It's a
Yeah,
bigger deal than we
You're
realize.
sort of in this little tube. You know, an airplane is kind of like a little pencil tube. It's a small little thing, and there you are jetting along and
It's like,
in trust that the pilot is really going to get you there.
sometimes we think we exercise faith, and that's great. We don't exercise faith, well, it's not. There is a negative side that's trying to pull you away.
Always.
Yeah. And
It's interesting
yeah,
to
go on.
me that, you know, there will be a time when our faith will be sight, and we don't have trust. But for some reason, while we're here, and I don't know why, faith is a big deal to God. He could reveal it always. He could just show up, oh, don't worry about it, you're going to get a job here, and just give you visions, and he lets you know every moment when you're worried. No, don't worry.
Yeah.
But for some reason, he doesn't.
And I think I want to come to this point again, because here in this story, this woman had a word from the Lord.
Yeah.
How many times I would love to be able just to go to Pastor Kenny. And Kenny says, thus saith the Lord. Bang, yes, go do this. And oh, thanks. No more thinking, no more sense of questioning, and am I doing the right thing? All that is the normal piece when we don't have a word from the Lord.
Mm-hmm.
Am I really stepping in the right direction here? So those little kind of dark doubting areas are part of faith, because we just don't see it all, and we don't quite know. We've got these general revelations that usually touch on our salvation and our eternity, and so we embrace those. I know for beyond a shadow of a doubt, when I fold my arms across my body and breathe my last, I'm going to be with the Lord. Am I a proud person? Am I trusting myself? No, I'm trusting Him. It's this issue of trust again, trusting the pilot. The Lord promised these things. He's not a liar. I've never come across another religion in all my studies that ever where the God promises to the people, I've done this for you, just believe, and you'll receive. So there's something wholly unique about the message of the Bible, about the God of the Bible. But it's that sense of trust. But in this world, when we don't have a word, and there's a story we're going to look at, maybe not next week, but there's a story we're going to look at that I think is very helpful for most of us when we just don't have the specific word. from the Lord.
Mhm.
So, any other pieces here to this thing? Otherwise, we'll close it out in
What are
prayer.
you thinking, Chris?
It doesn't say anything about our sons walking and guys, hey, go get this, why do we have to do that? And, obviously they were, it doesn't really say they were a Christian family or anything, but obviously a faithful family raising good kids that there wasn't any, pushback, I guess, from the kids for this. So that, I think that was interesting, that must have meant that everybody was really, they were faithful.
Well, the fact that they live in that century
Yeah.
versus this century is a big thing.
Yeah, but yeah,
Yeah, Chris makes a point about, it sounds like the sons were at least faithful. There was no pushback. I'm kind of with you. Like, I wish I had a little more color on these boys. Like, on the one hand, I'm saying, why weren't you taking care of your mother? I mean, that's my first response. But then I say, well, no. This crazy thing that Elisha asked her to do, they went right along with it. So I
Yeah.
see positive there. So, yeah.
yeah, there's a kind of group participation in this faith, isn't there?
Mhm.
Isn't there? Yeah. So it's not just the mom, but them, and what does that speak into their life? They too were, in spite of life and what happened to them. This is something their dad left to them. This is their inheritance from their father. Debt. Debtor's prison. Thank you, Dad. But they were faithful and participated together in that faith with the widow.
Mhm.
So, yeah, think about that one. How much our faith together. How much? Let me just finish this question because we're 10:20. How much of your faith to invite somebody to church matters? It's not just like, well, it's up to God if they believe. How much of it is you're exercising faith? You can't save them, but on their behalf, you're saying, come to church. Or whatever, you're sharing the faith with them, and you're trying, you're praying, you're praying with them or for them, and you're trying to make those steps. How much of their faith is hinging on our faith? There's something here. I know we can't believe for people. I know that, but if we're too negligent too, I think this is a good story about that. The kids jumping in there. There's something there with maybe like the 4 guys who brought their friend who was paralyzed and dropped him to the roof.
Mhm.
He couldn't walk to Jesus. They had to carry him.
Mhm.
They took him. So, hey, let's pray. David, pray us out.
Sure. Father, we want to understand faith better. We want us to ground our faith in the one who has called us, the one just grounded in what you're like.
Yeah.
Father, I thank you for this story. I am not this hard and desperate like this woman is. And yet it's a reminder, God, you come through. Here's another story. You come through. So help us look to you when our life is hard in really, really hard areas, or even areas that are maybe not as challenging as this poor lady, unnamed woman. Maybe we'll meet her, or could you let her, yep, that was me. Oh, wow, tell me again, how many jars? But we thank you for this example. Father, I pray that we would be obedient to the littlest thing you ask us to do, and get past the looking foolish, and that we could hear that well done and see you move. So I pray you'd be with us each this week. Father, I just pray a special blessing on the ladies. Thank you for all our moms. Thank you for those who are moms. And we just bless you the way you've put this world together. So thank you for all this in Jesus' name.
Amen. Amen.
Mhm. What a great story. Huh? Oh my goodness.
And short enough.